Hi, everybody. What is the difference between ISO 1345 certification and ISO 1345 compliance? Well, in order to answer that, I first have to explain what compliance is and what certification is. So let's start with compliance. Have you ever thought about how many times you have a nonconformity to a requirement in a standard? That's talking about compliance. Those are things that you're supposed to do. Those are requirements. I sort of feel like Ed Rooney here. How many times was your son absent from school? Well, let's do the study here and figure it out. We're going to actually go to the ISO 1345 standard. I have it on my screen here. And we're going to do a little search. You hit Control F. There we go. And requirements, if I type that in, I'm going to get 317 different times that word appears. But let's pick the word shall. How many times does it say you shall do something? Well, it says 259 times. And interestingly enough, if you jump ahead to, I think it's like the fifth or sixth shall in the document, right in the beginning, 0.2 is the clause. So this is the very beginning where they're giving an introduction to the ISO 1345 standard. It says shall indicates a requirement. So that's what compliance is all about. Are you doing all the things you shall do? Now, there are things you should do, you may do, you can do. They explain those here as definitions as well. But shall is the compliance part. So are you compliant with the standard? Interestingly enough, the FDA does not require certification. They require compliance. So you shall do the things that are in ISO 1345 come February 6, 2026. You shall do those things as of that date. But you're not required to get certified by the FDA. That's not how other countries do it. For example, Canada is the only country in the world that requires that you shall get certified to a specific standard, and we'll talk about that later. So 259 times is how many times you see the word shall in the ISO 1345 standard. So now let's go on to the next definition. What is certification? So certification is when somebody gives you a certificate. That's all it is. Nothing fancy. It's a certificate. But just like money, there's money that's real and there's money that's fake. You don't want a counterfeit certificate. You want an authentic certificate. You also might want to consider what is the difference between $1 in one country and $1 in another country. Not always is money worth the same amount. That's why we have exchange rates. Well, same thing for certificates. You get a certificate from one organization, it might not be as important as a certificate from another organization. And go figure, the price tag matches. So when you get a certificate for ISO 1345, there are multiple types of certificates that you can get. You might ask, what are those? Well, one type is just a simple ISO 1345 certificate. It says that you comply with the standard. So how is that different? Because somebody gave you a piece of paper, and it might not even be a real piece of paper. It might be a PDF piece of paper. Now, it's really nice if you get a fancy printed one on special heavy bond paper with a hologram on it. You pay extra money for those, of course. And if you want more than one, well, you're out of luck. You get one. And you hang it up in a pretty frame in the office or lobby of your company. And that's your ISO 1345 certificate. Other companies just send you a PDF. But what also matters is what is the organization that issued that certificate? Was it a certification body that is recognized only in a small area, such as Let's say ANAB certificates, those could be for the whole world, but they're not covering all of Europe. They're not covering the MD-SAP countries, the 5 countries that are part of the single audit program. It's a quality system certification program through an accreditation body called ANAB, A-N-A-B. And so there are different certification bodies that use them. One of them that we work with and we recommend is Eagle Certification Group. But Eagle Certification Group cannot give you a certificate that is going to help you in Europe, because in Europe you need it done by a notified body. They also can't give you a certificate for the Medical Device Single Audit Program, or MD-SAP. The Medical Device Single Audit Program is representing 5 different countries. One of those is Canada. They require it. The other 4 are optional: US, Brazil, Australia, and Japan. So if you're in one of those 5 countries, an MD-SAP certificate has some benefit to you, but you have a limited number of organizations that can issue that kind of certificate. Those are called auditing organizations. Yes, there are a lot of companies that do auditing, including our company, but we're not auditing organizations. It's a legal term under MD-SAP, and only certain companies can issue those. In addition, there are sometimes accreditation bodies that are country specific, such as Standards Council of Canada, SCC. So if you see SCC logo on your certificate, then you know that's accredited, that whoever that organization was, they were accredited by SCC. If you see a logo for a country like UCAS, that would give you a clue that, oh, maybe this is a British accreditation body that issued this. And they have ones for other countries like the Netherlands and Germany. So it depends on what country you're going to, what certification bodies are acceptable to that country. And so you have to make sure that you select a certification body that can issue that type of certificate. They're all ISO 1345 certificates, so they're all saying the same thing. You comply with that ISO 1345 standard. However, how they go about proving that depends on the accreditation body's requirements. And there's also a standard for it. ISO 17021 is another standard that tells you how you're generally supposed to conduct certification audits. So we have accreditation bodies, we have certification bodies, we have auditing organizations, all this stuff. It's just who is saying it's okay to issue that certificate. And the more accreditation bodies and the more authorizations there are for you to give that, the more expensive it is and the more valuable it is, because it's your key into more countries. So those are the types of certifications in terms of general certificates and accreditation bodies. But another thing to think about here, and let me try to share this for you, is you can get certified to other standards, not just ISO 1345, but you might also get certified to ISO 27001. We're seeing a new trend where the notified bodies, these are the organizations that are auditing organizations that issue certificates for the member states in Europe. Those organizations are pushing companies to demonstrate they are compliant with the what is considered the state of the art, ISO 27001, and ISO 27001 is for security. So it's an information security standard. And if you have a certificate from an accredited certification body, that's more reliable than we claim compliance, or we had somebody audit us, like Rob Packard audited us to that. No, if you have a certificate to that, that's better. So we're seeing some companies start asking for quotes on ISO 27001 in addition to 1345. Now, we've seen this before. We've seen it for 14971. There was a big push. Let's get all those auditors qualified on 14971. And I actually did certification audits for 14971. But I was one of the very, very few that actually was asked to do that. So you train them up, you get them qualified, and then nobody actually wants to pay the money for that. So I don't know how many companies will actually pay for ISO 27001, but the cybersecurity requirements and information security requirements are much more important than a lot of the other standards, because you could actually shut down a hospital and affect all these other systems. If you didn't fill in your 14971 risk management documentation correctly, that doesn't mean your product's not necessarily safe. But this security information standard, that might have a little bit more importance, and I think that's why we're seeing a little bit different approach to it, where it's being expected as a state of the art. Go get your certification to the standard. So I think that's something we're going to see, and I think we're going to see more auditors trained in this. So they'll have to be trained on ISO 13485. They'll have to be trained on risk management 14971. They'll have to be trained on 62304, because if you're going to do this, you're also a software company. So you need IEC 62304. They need to be trained on usability, because you have a graphic user interface with any computer device. So now we need IEC 62366. And of course, now we have the information security standard as well, 27001. And are you going to get certified to all of those? No, you're probably not. So you're going to pick wisely which ones are really meaningful and are worth getting certified instead of just claiming compliance. However, internal auditors might be expected to raise the bar a little bit, particularly if you're auditing companies that do software as a medical device, like cloud-based systems, or software in a medical device that communicates with the cloud and has wireless connectivity. Those are going to be critical to make sure you have a strong security program and security architecture in your product. So go think about looking up this ISO 27001 standard, and think about not only getting ISO certified to 1345, but also maybe some other standards. I hope that answers your questions about what is the difference between ISO certification and ISO 1345 compliance, which is required by the FDA. And if you have other questions, please don't hesitate to type down in the chat or comments below in this live stream what your questions are, and suggest new topics for the future. Now, we did have a couple of comments for other people here. Let me see what I've got. Okay, from my friend Matthew. Certification can be measured. Even with some findings, you may keep a certificate. How is compliance measured? So Matthew always comes up with the tough questions for me. Just like I said, I like to go in there and do like the Ferris Bueller approach here, or Ed Rooney approach. We're going to measure how many times the student was late. Well, in an audit, how many nonconformities do we have? If we're doing MD-SAP certification, if you've looked at what the grading process is, they don't just have major and minor, they have scores 1 through 5. If you have 5, you're not getting certified. If you have too many 4s, you won't be recommended for certification either. 1s, 2s, and 3s are okay, but not the 4s. So if you just had 1, you could still be recommended for certification. You would have to implement corrective actions for each of your findings, and the 4s would be the highest priority. But if you have multiple of those, that can prevent you from getting certified. And it's a risk-based approach, the score being the risk. So that's one way to measure compliance, and that can be immediately associated with certification. Another way is when an auditor is reviewing things, they're supposed to they're actually supposed to look at records. So it's not enough to say, we have a procedure. You have to write down what the procedure is and what the revision is, and show some evidence that you actually read it and made sure the company actually does some of those things in there. So we say, we use in the process approach, how is it done? So what procedure, what form, then we say what records we sampled, and then we try to provide additional information about who's trained on it, and we take some notes about what we learned when we interviewed that person. So these are some of the things that we do to measure whether they're compliant, whether they did the things that say shall. So it says you shall maintain records, you shall create a procedure or establish a procedure. Where is that procedure? So that's how we measure compliance. It's by looking at the record. So what do we look at and what do we look for? We look for it's under document control. It's not a draft. It's got a date on it. It may or may not have a signature on it. With digital processes, or depending on your workflow, you might have a cover sheet, a document change order, and that's where the signature is. And there might be multiple documents that were approved on that same change order, but that's how it works. Okay, let's go look at Matthew's other question. I think we saw that with ISO, so IEC 62304 certification as well. He's right. Not only did we see companies that want to be 14971 certified, and we've seen some companies do that for marketing purposes. A lot of translation firms did that. I think one of the first, probably the first 14971 certification ever issued was to a translation house. And I did one of those early certification audits myself. But 62304, that wasn't issued until I think 2006. So it was a little later than 14971. So you would expect the certifications later. And there was a transition period when people were using more traditional process approaches to software development. And then Agile and Scrum techniques came in. So we're seeing there's some legacy systems, and then we have some modern systems. So not everybody had the same methods of software development in managing their software lifecycle, and that's what 62304 is all about. It's how you manage the lifecycle of your software development, how you identify bugs, how you fix bugs, how you release updates and patches to your software. And that's the same thing we see in the AAMI TIR 57 for cybersecurity. So yes, we saw that for 62304, and you might want to consider that if you're a software developer. That's something you want to be certified in. That would certainly make it a lot easier to qualify you as a vendor if I'm thinking about hiring your company. And if I was thinking about cybersecurity, I might say, hey, do you have ISO 27001 certification? Something to ask. So thank you, Matthew. Those are great comments. Okay, so I think I'm done with the banners for today. If you have any questions, as I said, please put them down below in the comments, and I will respond to those. And also, if you have any suggestions for next week's, I haven't planned next week's yet. I'm going to do that this afternoon. So put your comments in there and get your ideas in there for next week. And please share this with anybody else in your company that's like, what's the difference between compliance and certification? This will answer their question. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.